For us at Metabolic, we take a systems approach to defining a circular economy. The essence of systems thinking is that you don't look at just an object on its own, you consider everything that it's connected to. So we start with the importance of materials, that in a circular economy, all materials should be recovered at their highest value use and ideally cycled indefinitely within the system. So we have a set of 7 pillars for the circular economy. If you translate these 7 pillars to a city, you get a really beautiful vision of a future where you have nature integrated into an urban environment, you have reduced vehicle transport, you're taking advantage of self-driving vehicles and a lot of different technologies for automating transport and logistics. And of course, you are basically creating a kind of garden city where there's also a huge amount of water collection and food production within the city itself. I think it starts from having a really clear vision of where you want to go and how to create this sustainable circular city. I grew up in New York City. In New York City, Times Square, my entire childhood was this very, very crowded place where there were always huge amounts of cars. And several years ago, someone in the mayor's office decided that they wanted to make Times Square a pedestrian-only zone. And this was a shocking recommendation. And everyone said, well, you can't do that. This is the center of the city. But they said, well, it's only going to be a temporary experiment. We're going to try it for the summer. So they got permission to do this, and everyone loved it so much that it's now basically become semi-permanent. So sometimes you can get through these barriers that stakeholders have by creating temporary experiments and testing out whether people actually like the results. And the second thing is that you can actually engage in some more proactive nudging of people's behavior and some more social engineering. So for example, everyone thinks about the Netherlands as this place where everyone bicycles, but it wasn't always like that. The Netherlands in the 1950s, it was a very car-focused culture. The government made a conscious choice to introduce cycling as the de facto mode of transport. They actually introduced plans top-down to include bicycle lanes everywhere, and it became over time a part of the national identity. There's clearly some kind of conflict of interest between stakeholders that can emerge, and there are challenges from the government's role to understand how strictly to regulate and how to phase certain changes in. Sometimes it takes more time, sometimes it takes a generation, or at least you have to start through educating younger children to create change over time. And that is something that governments and cities can do, but you have to be progressive about it. The food system as a whole has been estimated to cause between 20 and 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Cities are in total responsible for 60 to 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is massive. If the food system is responsible for 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions and we eliminate food waste, we can reduce the total CO2 emissions of the world by 10%. In different parts of the world, food waste is caused at different parts in the supply chain. In developed countries where people have a lot of money, actually most of the waste is caused at the consumer because consumers buy too much food and then they don't cook it. There's also a lot of education to do around the way that we can use food that have recipes or share food in cities. There's a lot of apps that can actually lead to food waste reduction. There's meal sharing apps and these kinds of things. And very importantly, preventing food waste from supermarkets. And if we're talking about the supply chain, then a lot of it is around improving collection, storage, and logistics. We've calculated that you can really reduce food waste pretty easily by up to 50% if you just implement all of these different strategies and educate people throughout the value chain correctly. To produce food in cities, you have a few challenges that you need to deal with. One of them is that land is really expensive. So the low value products that you can produce in agriculture don't make a viable business case in the city. You also have lack of space for storage and processing and a lack of the right kind of labor a lot of the time. But there are ways that you can integrate food production successfully into cities, and that is partly by developing really efficient vertical concepts that also take advantage of different types of crops and products that can be grown in the dark, so you don't need extra electricity. There's also opportunities to explore in the future for floating farms that can take advantage of larger amounts of space on water that can create different types of stacked food production systems that can supply to cities. There are many great business cases that are super sustainable and also very profitable. So you can find the intersection between sustainability and profitability. We have a very short-term focused business community. A lot of people expect return on investment within 3 years, and that is not the right perspective to have when we're concerned about resources that we need to preserve for eternity. If people were able to change their perspective, or if we could create a system that would allow them to take a longer-term perspective, then most of the things that we need to do for achieving a circular economy would be considered very profitable. My advice to cities who are just starting their sustainability journey is to, first of all, understand where you're starting. So you have to do an analysis to understand your baseline performance, the resource flows that you're dealing with, the capabilities that you have within both your staff and also within your citizenry. And I think conducting this kind of mapping exercise to understand where you are is the basis for then developing a really good vision and a really good strategy. It's really important to take some risk, not be afraid to experiment a little bit. You need to push the boundaries. If you want to change a system, you have to create growth, and that sometimes involves removing what there is already. And that's just part of the way that nature works and that cities also need to develop.